What's up guys, Tang Type 1 here. Today, we have a little bit of a new setup here now that we're back in action. We're going to talk a little bit about bolusing, about correcting, about hitting that target, getting that perfect blood sugar from high back to exactly where you want it. I know I've talked about correcting before, but there's something I want to hone specific on today, and it's about seeing your blood sugar as a moving target. When you're at a shooting range or you have a bow and arrow or something, you have a moving target. You're not shooting for where your target is currently, but you shoot for where you know it's going to be, right? It's the same thing with your blood sugar. You don't want to, whenever you take your blood sugar, you don't want to see, oh, well, it's this high, therefore I'm going to correct it by this much, and that's it, and it's going to work out great. Now, if there's nothing else on the table, that could work. But often that's not the case. Often, and everyone knows about insulin on board, IOB, everyone knows that there might be insulin on board that is going to affect that blood sugar and bring it down. I don't really want to talk about that so much. I mean, I'll mention obviously it's important that if you just ate some food and your blood sugar is up a little bit, you might not want to correct it just yet because you still have your insulin in effect from that previous dose, so keep that in mind. But really, I want to talk more about is the opposite of that, because I feel like, especially those of you that have a pump, right? If you have a pump, it's going to do a lot of the work for you when it comes to insulin on board. In fact, I mean, it seems like it almost do a little bit too much work for you. It will take off a lot of insulin based on if you have insulin on board. So if you're trying to correct and you got insulin on board, well, it might not want to do it. Gets a little dicey. One reason I don't really like pumps so much, I think they kind of want to leave you a little bit too high. They're a little bit too worried about hypoglycemia. We want to get down to 80, 100. We don't want to stick around in the 300s all day because we're worried about insulin on board. Regardless, I want to talk more about the opposite of that, which would be the fact that your blood sugar might be going up, okay? And a good example of that is if you have a high protein meal. And if you're like me, you do that all the time. I eat very low carb, very high protein. So that means, for dinner I had 6 chicken wings, big chicken wings. Or the other day I had a gyro without any bread, just a ton of gyro meat. That's high protein, very low carb. And this matters because when you're eating a lot of protein, what can happen is that it's not like the food that you're eating is going to affect you right then and there. Your blood sugar is going to go up, and you correct it, and that's it. And that's not how it works. It's more like your blood sugar starts going up slowly, and it just keeps wanting to go back up, because your liver is using that protein and slowly making glycogen, and that's affecting you hours and hours later. And to give you an example just from the other day, I often recommend dosing twice for these high protein meals. Our insulin even, it's a slower insulin, and you actually dose it twice, once in before the meal and once maybe 2 hours later, because then you're actually able to take care of that long stretch of that glycogen release, of that blood sugar slowly going up, and then you can get a nice, even, consistent, flat line. Now let's say you forget it, like happened to me the other day. Happens every now and then, right? I forget to dose that second dose. Well, in that case, if it's late in the night, I'm about to go to bed, I'll just take a little bit of fast-acting insulin to correct however high that blood sugar went as a result of missing the second dose, and then I'll go to bed. But if I dose for just what that blood sugar is, very consistently, I'll wake up high the next day. And by high, I mean, of course, like 150, 160, higher than I'd like. Typically, I'd prefer to wake up, 80 to 100, like I want to be normally. And I can do that, but to do that, I have to think about that moving target when it comes to blood sugar. If I consider the fact that, well, in the past, I've eaten this, and it's affected my blood sugar long after I've eaten, and if my blood sugar is here now, it'll probably be even higher later. If I think that in mind, I'm going to actually dose more than I normally would for that number. So let's say my blood sugar was 170 and went to bed because I forgot to dose a little bit of insulin, or the dose was too low or something like that. If I know it's going to keep going up, I'll dose, instead of 3 units for 170, I'll dose 4 units. I'll up it 1 unit, 1.5 units, something like that. Not saying usually you can do exactly that, but that's what I did. And when I do that, like I did the other night when I missed that dose, I wake up, my blood sugar is good. My blood sugar is in that nice magic range. Why? Because I dosed with the future in mind. I considered it a moving target, where rather than it just standing still at the blood sugar that I took it at whatever time I took it. So just something to keep in mind when you're dosing. Keep in mind the context, basically, of where your blood sugar is going, where it's been, where it will be, and what you did in the past, what you might be doing later. Let's say you're exercising later, that can have an impact. Keep that all in mind when you're doing your corrections. I understand that this might not be so relevant if you're using a pump, but don't let the pump do all the thinking for you either, okay? Think for yourself, because that pump's thinking more in the terms of not letting you go low, rather than always keeping your blood sugar exactly where you want it to be. So just a few things to consider. Maybe I'll do another video about pump corrections. But I'll leave it at that for now. Y'all keep taming your type 1. And when you consider what your correction should be, whenever you have a high blood sugar, consider where it's going to be later when you make that correction. And I know that's going to be a bit of a leap of faith. Oh, I'm dosing a little bit more than I normally would. Is this a good idea? Especially when you're going to bed. But as long as you are consistent with your meals and you experiment and you tinker those corrections and those boluses and everything up and down to fit, you're going to be able to have confidence that's going to work because you've already tried it before. So just experiment with it, give it a try, see what happens. Don't go crazy with it. And by the way, last thing I'll mention, if you want to avoid risk when it comes to correcting, you don't want to correct too much, end up too low, the best way to avoid risk is to simply not have such a high blood sugar in the first place. It's a lot less risky to correct a blood sugar less than 200 than a blood sugar over 300, right? Because the law of small numbers, if you have a higher correction, the range that it could end up at can vary a lot more. And in fact, often what you find is that you actually need much more insulin than you think to get it back down than you normally would. So it gets quite complicated the higher you go. So eat low carb, keep that blood sugar from going too crazy. Keep on it, keep experimenting, and don't forget about that moving target that is your blood sugar. That's all for now. Keep taming your type 1.